something I worked on for years was Spring Data JPA. It says there in the intro. I was the project lead for that. So that was something where you have a toolkit, an ORM to help you do entity management. Now the question arises, what if you're working with .NET? What if you're a .NET developer? That's a pretty packed stack to use. And so do you use Spring Data.NET? No. So I had to turn and find somebody who knew what that was. And would you believe it? But my buddy Felipe seems to have a little something in his pocket on this topic.
Hi, hi, Greg.
Hey,
That was a very nice intro about this. I'm not an expert on .NET, but we have a lot of customers, and they are using also .NET. So sometimes I've been asked, hey, how can I integrate my .NET apps with a CockroachDB? So yeah, we are here to at least give them part of what they need to do, right, in order to create awesome apps.
that's right. See now, you got to, I don't, you've got a lot of stuff. You were like, "Hey, how about ADO.net?" And I said, "ADO dot what?" And I had to go do a little bit of reading to catch up on that. And I said, "Oh, this is Hibernate." And it's so you went and put something together. Felipe, like maybe I'm a heavily deep experienced in Java. Felipe has a very wide palette of stuff. So the offline, he's like, "Hey, what about? Do we need to cover this? Do we need to cover that?" And I said, "Let's put it on the schedule. But what are we going to cover next?" So let's see what you got in store for us, Felipe.
Well, I don't know, guys, if you remember, we started with the last time was like a EF core, like the .NET EF core, where we go through the payroll application, something that you already know. And we've been doing this for quite a while, from Spring Boot, JPA, JDBC, and all that kind of a range of technologies that we can do with the Spring. Now is the turn of .NET, right? So the last time we did like the EF core, and now we're going to do the other alternative that .NET provides for all the developers, right? So we're going to even compare just a little bit on what is like a EF core that we did, like an entity framework, and now we're going to do ADO.NET, right? So I have a presentation for you guys, so we can kind of do the kind of a recap on what we do, or actually what we did the last time. So let me go ahead and start with this. So yeah, we're going to do a recap of the payroll application. First of all, remember we start using EF Core, and practically we have like our payroll. We created this particular structure where we have the library, we have the data EF, where we're going to do all the entity framework, and then we have the web API. As you can see, we have for each, for example, for the library, we created an employee. We create this particular interface that is going to have my contract to actually create a part of the services, a part of implementing the EF repository down below. And finally, we have our controller, our program, and of course, some DB initialization that we needed to do, right? And of course, we have the app settings.json that has the string for how to connect into CockroachDB. So this was our application in part one, if you will. And I heard kind of a lot of comments like, why do you have all this structure? Maybe we should be able to do everything in one place. And I say, yes, of course, there are many ways to do these kind of applications. And even if it's a small one, yeah, probably you want to put everything in one file. But here, kind of the cool thing, I want to start from something that we can actually extend, right? So we, at some point, we needed to extend these kind of things. It's going to have many iterations. So why not start kind of a structuring since the beginning, and now, start going step by step. So this is the architecture. This is part of the architecture. So right now, yes, we have a part of the payroll solution. Remember, we have what I'm going to show you is how actually they are connected between each other, right? So probably in the part one, it wasn't clear how maybe we were related with all these particular classes. So the thing is, we have the payroll DB context, we have our repository, we have the implementation of this repository where we have the save, the create, the find, even we have our find from kind of a going back in time. I don't know if you remember that we've been doing this in every single episode when we're talking about code. Practically, we are doing that particular scenario where we are going back 30 seconds, 1 minute. Those kind of scenarios where CockroachDB is very good at it. So in this case, we have this particular scenario. We have the employee service that is actually going to use the repository, meaning that we're going to work with interfaces. What that is going to allow us is practically switch between those. And that's what we're going to do actually, right? Of course, the employee service knows about the employee. We have the controller that is going to use the employee service. It knows also about the employee. And of course, we have some initialization, right? So this is kind of the structure that we have for the solution. And we have our program. Our program is going to read about the application settings. So that's part of what we are doing, right? Now, there is on the program, remember that the first thing that we do, so these are the steps that we are needed for the entity framework. First of all, step one, we need to add a scope, practically register the payroll DB context. Remember, the DB context is part of the entity framework where you are telling, hey, this is my object relational mapping. You are going to have a set of employees, and practically I'm going to tell you what are my columns, right? So we did that. So the second thing that we needed to do is just register the repository as employee EF repository. Why? Because practically the employee EF repository has the implementation of what we actually did, right? So actually implement all those kind of actions like a create, find, like delete. Those things are living in my contract. And of course, the implementation is the employee EF repository. The third step that we did for this particular program was to register the employee service, right? So we needed to do that registration for the employee service. And then we needed to add or register the employee controller and finalize practically with my web app. And my web app, practically, we need to map the controllers. Once we have everything wired up, of course, what we need is to initialize the database, meaning that, hey, go ahead and just insert some records, and that will be part of the whole thing. Now, we use the web app run, and the web app run is looking for the app settings where, practically we have the connection string. Now, this part, what we're going to talk about today will be to add new functionality on what we have. And in this case, we have the ADO.NET. ADO.NET, you can see the difference where you actually need more control. The EF core, it's the ORM of .NET, right? But ADO.NET gives you more power, right? It's gonna give you even more tools that actually go that can in this case for your application, you can have a more robust application, right? So you have the power inside using ADO.NET. So based on what we have on our architecture, what we needed to do is practically the next thing. First of all, we need to add a new class. As you can see, if you remember the structure, it was payroll.data.ef, but in this case, I'm adding the ADO. Then we need to add this particular project into the solution. The next thing we need to do is just add the reference from the library, because the library, remember, it has the service, it has practically my model, the employee, and it has the, in this case, the interface, right? So it has the contract that is going to be reused. And you're going to see how easy it is. Practically, it's just adding new behavior and just swapping, and the rest of the application keeps intact. You don't need to do anything. It's just swapping the way that you are implementing these things. And of course, The next thing is on this ADO package. Now we need to add the dependency. And remember, CockroachDB, it's high level. It's a Postgres, kind of a layer that we have. It's a translation from Postgres. We are using the Postgres protocol in order to connect to CockroachDB. So that's why we can add the MPG SQL package, right? So we're using that on that part. So now that we have added these, how can we control these things? So remember, we have the payroll data ADO. Now we need to add the employee ADO repository, and that's it. That's practically it. We don't need to do anything. Of course, on the program, we need to modify just a few lines, but the rest, you don't touch anything, right? That's the beauty of starting right now from an structured way where you have these particular modules that are totally independent. And because we start basing our small application into or based on contracts, based on interfaces, that allows me to extend, that allows me to implement new behavior. So that's kind of the idea. So before we have this, right? So before we have this particular architecture, right? So just again, take a look into this. What will be the next step if we're adding a new class? So practically we're adding the ADO package, and the only thing that we're doing is just implement from the iRepository. That's it. That's pretty much. And of course, there are something that we need to do in the program level, right? In the program level, we practically are doing the same thing except for the first step. The first step, remember, we needed to actually register the payroll DB context that was part of the EF core. No anymore. We are not using EF core anymore. So practically, we need to add still the repository, still the server, the employee, and that's it. Practically the same things that we did before. The only difference here, and I put it in a different color, will be the employee ADO repository. That's the only difference. We eliminate one step and we only switch the implementation. So if you remember before, the iRepository, when we register that as an employee EF repository. Here we're using the employee ADO repository. So that's kind of the thing. So now let's jump into the demo. Let me switch into the demo, and let me show you again. Remember, this is how it looks like. This is my program, and everything that you're seeing here, we already have that into our public repository. So please go ahead, download, clone this particular project if you want to know more about it. And I put a lot of comments so you are able to actually follow the code and practically do, modify that yourself. So in this case, something that I was saying here is that, yeah, we're going to use, again, the web application. We are registering all this, and this is ADO.NET, but check out here. I have the EF core. It was the step 2 when we needed to do the payroll DB. And of course, the scope of the repository here is different. The repository now is part of the employee ADO repository. And the employee repository needs this connection. But let's take a look into ADO repository. Let's see how it looks like. Well, even before that, let's go very quickly to review the iRepository. Remember this, the iRepository has practically is based on generics. And of course, I can admit that I always love everything that the Spring team did. And in this case, Greg, at some point with all his contributions, and practically I'm following the same practice, right? So it's part of what I liked a lot about the Spring framework. Why not bring in some of these particular ideas into .NET, right? So with this, I'm creating this generic thing where I'm doing a create and find by, get all sync, update async, delete, save changes, and of course the new one, the get recent by role async. If you remember on a Spring Boot, it was very easy just to add query and practically do this kind of a select, inject the select right there and put native because there are some proprietary keywords from CockroachDB. Here, we are going to see how it looks like, right? So this is my contract. This is my repository. So let's take a look. In your left, you're going to have the payroll data ADO and only one class. And let's take a look into this particular class. Let me, So from this class, again, I'm implementing the I repository, right? So I'm using an employee and a global unique ID as my primary key. So with this, I'm saying, hey, I need a connection string. Why? Because, take a look. Every time that I'm doing a particular thing, of course, this can be part of maybe a superclass, right? I can have a connection. This is just for demo purposes. Normally, you don't do this for every single one because once you have this, you need to close. The cool thing is about async is closed automatically, but in every single one, I'm trying to get a connection. Probably this is not the best way, but you can have a supersede, right? So you can have a base where you have everything that you require here and practically create your dependence or your subclass where actually you are doing this kind of stuff, right? So this is kind of a very just as part of the example, right? So this is what the power of ADO gives you, right? So you are able to right now go directly and do insert into, for example, employees. You are using the connection, you are adding the parameters. It's very important to do this kind of stuff because you are kind of free of doing these kind of scenarios where you have the SQL injections, right? So these kind of SQL attacks and all that kind of stuff. So it's important for you to do commands and parameters. And this is how you add, for example, a new employee. For you add delete, you have the delete, you have a connection, you open that async, and practically you execute the non-query async. So it's actually the own implementation that you can have for every one of these guys. Now let's take a look into the one that we care about, right? Like a get the role by async. So I don't know if you remember, we have the select ID name from employees as of time of 30 seconds, where the role is equals to some role that we're going to pass. Now, how can I do that with ADO.NET? As you can see, it was very straightforward. You have a connection, you have a command, you pass in the SQL, you pass in the connection, you send the parameters, and then you execute the query. This reminds me a lot of the JDBC template, right? So it's the analogy that you can have there if you're using Spring. Now with this, take a look. For this thing is actually the same. You're sending the SQL connection, you are adding this particular parameter, and now you are executing these things and creating kind of the mapping of what you're getting back, right? So that's kind of the idea of using this. And as you can see, you can add more actions in every single one of these. Again, I'm just doing this is just a demo. Normally, you are not going to do every time you open a connection. Normally, you will have a base. You're going to have a pool of connections, and you're going to use that connections to actually create your SQL command and execute the query, right? So that will be how it's doing these things. Right now, it's just a demo purpose. So practically, this is what you are doing. So take a look. It's very similar to JDBC template. With JDBC template, practically you can have the role mapper, right? At some point, if you require some extra stuff that you require, right? You can actually execute something. Well, here in .NET is practically kind of the same, but using this particular syntax. So that's the employee ADO repository. Now, let's take a look into the program. Again, the program is sending the connection on CockroachDB. You register the employee service, you register your controllers, and you have the map of those controllers. And that's it. Practically, that's it. You don't move anything. the idea was just create the new class, register it, and that's it. That's pretty much, right? So let's run the application. Let's see if we can run it. Very good. Of course, is by default, the Rider app is going to go to this one. So I'm just going to use, I'm going to use the one that I always like on the web API. I have the HTTP employee, so we can actually take a look. So right now, I'm just going to go and say, hey, let's execute employees. And as you can see on employees, we have these things, right? So it was just a regular get. Again, take a look. The only thing that I did was the base URL is localhost 5293, and then the API employees, and practically we have just a content type application JSON, and we have this. Now let's take a look into the role, right? So by role, so if I click here, yes, we have only 2 employees, Felipe and Glenn. Glenn is an engineer. So now let's take a look. If we add Greg as a post, let's do this. And again, if I go ahead and say, hey, get by role, hey, still is Glenn, right? So remember, we are executing as a time of 30 seconds, behind, and say, hey, what happened 30 seconds ago? So practically we have that. And of course, after the 30 seconds, now we have this particular kind of a back in time. And once it reaches out, or once we pass that, practically we are going to have all listed engineers like this, right? So now we have Greg and we have a Glenn as well, right? So this is the way that normally you can use ADO on your programs. Again, you have the power of go into the nuts and bolts of using SQL, and of course use all the features on CockroachDB. At least we show you one. Now going back into this particular presentation, I have, these are the difference from the EF Core and ADO.NET. Remember, with EF Core, you needed to add step 1. But with ADO.NET, you don't require, because you don't need to tell the .NET framework, hey, this is my ORM. Practically, you are going to get everything yourself, and you're going to do all the mapping yourself. So practically, you don't need anything else. The only thing that you need to do is say, hey, I'm going to use register a repository. That's my service, my controls, and that's it. Those are the difference, right? So practically, I can select those here so you can see those. And I have for you guys a challenge, right? So how can I do, for example, if I run in my project, this is the way to run it on the command line, like a .NET run -- project, the name of the project, and in this case is the web API. And I can use EF Core, so switch between technologies. How can I do that? Or maybe, something like this, use ADO.NET, and maybe I can switch the port. Right now, the port is being, given by default, a particular port, but I want to actually be able to specify my own port. So how can I do that on this? Yes, we have the solution. You can go into our this particular repository, and you're going to find that into one of the branches. So yeah, that's it. That's how actually we can do CockroachDB with ADO and EF Core.
That is awesome. That is slim and trim, and I like that it didn't feel like you're, I don't know, plugging together as much stuff as the EF Core version was. So I kind of enjoyed that. I was going to say there's something else on the tip of my tongue, and I lost it. But I like that point of one of the things that maybe people miss is the CockroachDB has what's called follower reads, and that's the
Ooh,
sorry. Has the follower reads, and that's powered by its MVC system, which is multi-version concurrency control. And what people don't realize, actually, about any database of comparable size implements this. So we all may have this assumption of I'm going to update this row or I'm going to insert a row, and we think I'm updating the row in place. But what that requires that you do is you got to institute locks. You have to lock rows in order to apply changes, and that really causes stuff to pool up and queue up in the backlog. So instead, what databases do is they'll add a new record. There's a new record put into the system to represent the update, and when all parts are in place, it'll just move the pointer to it. So CockroachDB leans into it by saying, well, we can hold on to a window of data. We can hold on to what the state of the data was from some time ago. So it's very easy to go, hey, what was the system 30 seconds ago? Let me look at that. And there's some side effects for that. When we're talking about a distributed database system, you could easily sit there and say, well, if I'm looking at something from 30 seconds ago, I know all the replicas, all the distributed replicas in my cluster are going to be up to date by then. So it can service a call by looking for the closest replica and reduce latency. So that's a nice little benefit for follower reads. So if you don't need what's absolutely the current state of the system, but instead the state of the system 30 seconds ago, a still consistent state, then if you do that, the latency is shorter. There's no transactions in flight 30 seconds ago, so you also don't have to contend with any of that. It's a nice benefit. I do want to let people know that today's episode of Select Star is brought to you by Cockroach University. You can go visit university.cockroachlabs.com, and there's some free courses you can take where you can get your hands on an actual running cluster. We have this neat platform for doing training, and inside your browser you'll get a window that you're at a terminal, and there's some exercises you can do to explore distributed SQL and stuff like that. So if you're looking at this on video, there's a QR code on the screen. If you're listening to the audio podcast, go to university.cockroachlabs.com. And that's a cool one. And also, I forgot to put this up. I forgot to put up the applause banner because that was that I made earlier. It was like, yay. All right. Is there anything else we need to add in? That was
I was super fast because I had this presentation I wanted to share with the audience. I had some questions. It was I think the part one was watched, I don't know, maybe like last week, and I get some kind of questions from some of some customers saying like, I think you're doing like too much for a simple application. But then I say, probably yes, but if we start from the ground up, like in a very structured way, this will be a breeze when you start adding features, and just prove that by adding a new implementation, right? And I since always I've been I love the way that my base is Spring, so I love the way that on Spring we have all these interfaces that allows me to actually extend what I need or maybe adapt. And probably when I was teaching at some point in Spring, nobody noticed that in the Spring team, or you Greg, you guys were using keywords that allows me, and I already identify like okay, if I'm doing an implementation, I need to follow this naming convention. But if I want to override some behavior, I need to use the classes that end with adapter, right? So those kind of things were for me like, got it. I got it. So with this, I'm going to start doing all these cool stuff, and that's something that I at some point I want to tell, not only for the .NET environment, for other stuff like a Go, right? Like the Go environment, even with TypeScript, those kind of best practices or practices that I think that are very, very good, that help you to have a very good architecture. And practically, with CockroachDB, right now we are just on the tip of the iceberg, right? We we need something that I want to do is to show to the public these are the features that actually make possible CockroachDB, like locality, like doing these kind of a backups and restore. And by the way, Greg did an excellent job doing the backup and restore course and module. I was happy to go into your labs. It's amazing, right? So it's a lot of effort, and that's something that we are going to start doing very soon. Practically, I think in June, we're going to start with public classes. So please, guys, have that in mind. We're gonna start promoting those classes, public classes, and very soon we're gonna give you the links where you can register. So practically, we're gonna have modules, and Greg is going to teach as well.
Yep, we got a lot of content on the way. One thing you said earlier that caught my fancy is that somebody's like, "Well, your example's a little complex for this demo," and it's like there's always this tension between, well, I'm doing a demo here, I'm doing a live stream. Let's show how to connect to the database. Well, I can do it demo style and simplified, or I can do it here's what you would do in a real application where you've got to keep, I'm going to maintain this app for the next 8 years or something like that. And so one time I live streamed a few years ago, like, what are DTOs or DTOs versus entity objects? Because everyone's like, well, somebody told me use a DTO. Why do I need to do that? And there's, when you're writing a demo app, when you're demonstrating technology to a CTO to illustrate, hey, this may work for you, you probably don't need DTOs. But if you're building an app that you're gonna be sustaining for the next 8 years, by golly, you should use DTOs. What's the difference? And so we want to come in here and help people get the vibe on, I use this stack, I use .NET, or I use Spring, or I use Go, and I want to talk to CockroachDB because CockroachDB has got the scale that I need. CockroachDB can handle multi-region, can handle region level failure. The whole region can go out if I've set up my app right with CockroachDB, that it can fail over to another region seamlessly. So I need to use the stack that I'm on, and I need to integrate with the database you just can't kill properly. And so that's why we're trying to come here and bring that together to show you how to get up and running. And then at that point, hey, now you can go dig in and do what you need to do to make your app sizzle.
Yeah. Before we started streaming, we had and I think it's going to be already public. Uh, we have our latest version of CockroachDB, and they started showing the new features. And something that I like a lot was to be able to have a row secure level, right? So practically, imagine you have your different tenants, and practically you have a particular identifier that you are going to secure. So practically, you say, I'm going to index this particular field over this particular field with this global unique ID. Once you have that, you alter and you create a particular security level on that field with that particular ID. So the next time you do a select star with everything, for example, select star from employees, and you have that particular index, and you are not allowed to actually see those rows, it's going to show you everything but that particular row that you had the index with that particular or a specific ID. So this is amazing. We are getting into granular security for databases, so it's very cool.
Yep, we have no shortage of features. If there's something you're looking for, put it in the comments, register it in the comments, and then after you've written your comment, remember, go to your podcast platform and look for Select Stars Show. Trying to see if I can. I think I can post the link to find it. Yeah, let me put it up here in the. I'll post it on the banner here, but I'll put it in the comments here to be sure. So we'll put, come on, comment. Okay, we'll put a comment out there so you can get the link to find the podcast. So it's broadcast on a handful of immediate platforms: Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts. iHeartRadio, and then I found out there's about 120 or so like podcast distribution networks, and at a certain point, the lower tiers subscribe to the upper tier, so this it percolates. So whatever you listen to, whatever podcast, you can go find it. I think that makes for a good wrap today. Nice, slim and trim, and way to go, way to do it show. So let's give it up for Felipe. I don't have my little applause sound, so I'll have to do this.
Very good.
All right, we'll see y'all next time.
This episode is over, but your learning has just begun. Visit CockroachLabs.com to find all kinds of content to expand your knowledge.